Good evening, everybody. On behalf of Teagasc, I'd like to welcome you to this evening's webinar. My name is Ruth Fennell, and I work as part of the farm management team in Teagasc. And this evening's webinar is the second part of our series for Generation Renewal Week. So we started last night, where we discussed how collaborative options can be used to address generation renewal, and also how they can be used to help bring the next generation into the farming business structure. First up tonight, we're going to hear from James McDonnell. James works in the farm management team, and he's going to focus on a number of important factors to consider when making a will and the implications that happen when a will is not in place when somebody passes. James will then be followed by Enda Geoghegan, who's an advisor based in Ballina in County Mayo, and Enda is a trained mediator, and he will be joined by Claire O'Keefe, who runs a successful business, Succession Ireland. Claire has spent a large amount of time assisting families plan for succession, and she's also regularly guided families when difficulties arise when they are navigating their way through that process. Enda and Claire are going to discuss with you the process of starting the conversation on succession and inheritance, which sometimes can be challenging within family units. After both of these presentations have taken place, we'll then give you, the audience, an opportunity to ask any questions that you may have for our panel of speakers. So in order to ask your questions, I'll ask you to use the question button at the bottom of your screen that's available to you. Just to let you know, those questions that you ask are not visible to any of the audience or the participants. They're purely only visible to the panel. So we have Hugh McEnany, my colleague from the farm management team, who's going to run our question and answer sessions for us this evening. So you feel free to ask any of those questions. And just to clarify, they won't be viewed by the audience. They're purely viewed by Hugh, who is able to manage that team. So please feel free to ask any questions in the utmost confidence. Following on from this then, we'll just give you a little run-up of some of the other events that are going to be taking place as part of our Generation Renewal Week. So look, without further ado, I'll hand you over to James McDonnell. Thank you, James.
Okay, good evening, folks. Thank you for attending our webinar tonight. And I'm going to go through something that's a little bit outside my comfort zone, as I'm not a solicitor. So, but I have, I suppose, dealt with clients where somebody has died and there's no will in place, or I've also dealt with clients where there has been a will in place and things have been a lot more straightforward. So I'm going to go through that process and how we see it as a Teagasc advisor and the importance of making a will. For many of us, the farm isn't just a business though, it's a home, it's a history, it's the family's future. And unless we make our wishes clear in a will, we can risk leaving behind confusion, stress, and even conflict among those that we love most. So I'm going to try and cover that as best I can. So what does a will do? It can give us, first of all, I suppose it can give us clarity. It ensures that everybody knows what you wanted from your farm and your family. Secondly, it gives protection, as without a will, the law decides how your estate is divided. So it's the Succession Act of 1965 that was put in place by the Minister for Justice at the time, who was Charles Haughey. So you're allowing that law to decide what happens. And thirdly, it gives peace of mind. So you know your affairs in order when you have it written, and that your family won't be left struggling with uncertainty in the future. So some of the risks of not having a will: if a farmer passes away without a will, the farm could end up in legal limbo. So the farmer is said to have died intestate. In some cases, land or assets may have to be split up, and this might make no sense to the method of farming that's carried on, or how to carry on a business, depending on how the assets end up being split. Families may face unexpected bills from tax or a settling up a fair deal bill with the HSE. Worst of all, though, it can cause arguments and division at a time when a family should be supporting one another. I've seen families fall out over succession, and sadly, once the damage is done, it could last for generations, and nobody wants that to happen. So if you don't have a will and you die intestate, this is just a table to show you the kind of thing that can happen. So if there's a spouse left and no children, the spouse gets the entire estate. if there is a spouse and children, the spouse ends up with 2/3 of the estate and the children have 1/3 split between them. So if you've a large Irish family with 6 kids, you've got the spouse getting 12/18 and the kids getting 1/18 each. And I remember dealing with a case once upon a time, and I met a farmer and he told me that he had 13/18 of a farm. And I asked him, how did you end up in that position? He said, my dad died intestate and my mother got 2/3 of the farm. So she got 12/18, but she willed her 12/18 to me. So he ended up with 13/18. Then he had to do deals with some of the other siblings to end up trying to get the farm back together. So there was some sites and settlement and things like that. So it can get very complicated. If there's a spouse, if there's a children and no spouse, the children share the estate equally. If there's a father and mother and siblings, well, each parent gets 1/2. If there's a parent and siblings, the parent gets the entire estate. If there are brothers and sisters, they all get equal shares. Or if there's nobody else other than nieces and nephews, they all get equal shares. So that's an example of how the Succession Act of 1965 divides up an estate in an intestate situation. So I'm just going to look at the nursing home support scheme for a second. I suppose this can be seen sometimes as a stick. It's important to make a will and maybe have your affairs in order. And in an ideal situation, if you're looking at the Fair Deal scheme down the road, really you need to have no assets in your name. So a will is really a backstop. Should you pass on before you have the succession plan fully put in place. If you have the succession plan fully put in place, there might be very little left to divide. So the nursing home support scheme is a scheme that helps people pay for nursing home, and at the guts of €1,500 a week, it's very expensive. Nobody knows if or when they may need some care. How you get it is you put in an application, but you're assessed by your means and what assets you have. And any assets that you have transferred out of your name in the previous 5 years, there's a look back rule. So those assets are still on the hook until the 5 years are up. And really there's 2 methods of payment. If you don't, I suppose, engage and pass on your assets, your estate will make the payment should you need a nursing home support scheme after you pass. And if you do have a farm succession plan in place and you don't own anything or own very little, well, then the taxpayer ends up footing the bill. And I suppose, the best place to be is, that your estate doesn't have to cough up, because that puts the business at risk for the next generation that's trying to take it on. So the benefits for farmers then, to write a will, I suppose it should be clear. You decide yourself who inherits the farm and on what terms. You can protect vulnerable members of the family should you have vulnerable members. You can plan to minimize tax. Now, we know nobody ever knows when they're going to die. So planning to minimize tax is better to do while everybody's alive. It's much trickier to do through a will format because you don't know the date of death and you don't know what the recipient's position will be tax-wise when the event happens. So it's much easier to do while everybody's alive. You can make sure the farm remains a viable working business for the next generation. So that's a good benefit of having a succession plan in place. And it's not just about protecting the assets, it's about protecting your family harmony and the future of the land that you've cared for. And I suppose finally, I would say, when we talk to farm families about farm succession and generation renewal, the will is like in Brexit, we had a backstop. So the will becomes your backstop until the succession plan is agreed. So that would be step one, in my view. And I suppose leading on to what Enda and Claire will be talking about, if you're writing a will, you need to have a bit of communication, so the will is written, but that mightn't be exactly what the family wants. So communication becomes the next place or the next item on the agenda. And that could take some time, to work all that out. And Enda and Claire will talk about that. So when it comes to writing will, you need to think about your wishes. It's it doesn't have to be complicated. Who do you want to benefit? How do you want them to benefit? So you talk to your family. It allows you to manage expectations. You need to seek advice from your Teagasc advisor, your accountant, your solicitor, and put your will in writing using a solicitor, and keep it updated as the circumstances change. So if the family gets larger, you add a daughter-in-law or add a son-in-law or extra children appear, you do need to update it so that it caters for all of your family. Sometimes it takes a bit of money to get the advice because your situation might be complex. So you might need to hire an agricultural advisor or an accountant or a solicitor to get some advice. So the Department of Agriculture have put in place the Succession Planning Advice Grant. It was launched 2 years ago. And if you provide invoices, you can get 50% of your costs covered, subject to a maximum payment of €1,500. To qualify to get this grant, you must be 60 years of age or older. You must be farming a minimum of 3 hectares of land at the time of applying for the grant. And you must be farming for a minimum of 2 years prior to making an application for this grant. And you must use the advice of an accredited professional. So, a solicitor, a registered accountant, a registered Teagasc advisor, or agricultural advisor can be used. And you gather up your invoices and you make an application to the Department of Agriculture, and they will send you back 50% subject to a max payment of €1,500 in the first quarter of the following year. So finally, my key message is, it's not an easy conversation to have. Some people, I suppose, dread the thought of, writing the will because it means that, I'm thinking about death. But talking to solicitors, they often tell me that once somebody has made a will, it feels like they have made a decision. There's a weight lifted off their shoulder. So potentially you could live longer because you remove some of the stress. So it's worth making the effort. It allows you to protect your assets, your family, and your legacy. So I would say make an appointment. So if you sort the will out now, you might save a lot of hassle later on for your family. So back to you, Ruth, and I'll stop share.
Thanks very much for that, James. And I'm sure you've given us all something to think about. I think we know within the Irish population, 70% of individuals don't have a will currently in place. And I'm quite sure a large proportion of those 70% actually do have assets and would have a preference as to where they go to. So it is something that's really important. And I think that's why we've highlighted it here this evening. We have a poll put in on the bottom of your screen there. So in a minute now, I'm going to launch that. You'll see a button appear on your screen that you should be able to answer that. And we're just going to ask the audience, could they please just fill it in? It's a simple question of, do you have a will made? And the answer is either yes or no. It doesn't matter if it's in date or not. It's just either yes or no. And we'll give you the results of that poll when we're finished Enda and Claire's presentation after this. So if you wouldn't mind, those of you that have that up on your screens, you might just fill in the poll for us. And I'll end that then before Claire and Enda's presentation. Okay, so next I'm going to hand you over to Claire and Enda. They're going to outline to you how you go about starting that conversation around succession and inheritance, and where difficulties arise, maybe how you could navigate some of those. And I suppose at the end of the day, we're really trying to leave the family in a really good place at the end of this process, and to have really strong forged relationships as a result of that. And hopefully Claire and Enda are going to give you some of the tools that will help you to assist that. Okay, so I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ruth. And Claire, I suppose, look, we're just going to have a conversation here tonight just on the main importance of sitting down around the table as a family. And we'll say James was talking about the process of making a will and the importance of people being involved, and we'll say whether it's a will or whether it's a life transfer or whether it's a partnership, that conversation is always very important, Claire. Would you agree with that? Or is that the starting point, we'll say, with all transfers, sitting down with the family, and I suppose who does it start with as well?
Ideally, if it starts as normal when there is a family, that communication is normal and there's no topic that's not embraced. If you're fortunate enough to have teenagers or the next generation coming on, just keeping the communication around. If it's only the breakfast table on a Saturday morning, if that's the only time you have to talk, finding a time to talk together. And if you are the asset owner, it's your privilege to bring the best part of the farm to that kitchen table. Give the positive story so the next generation see the positives. And if it advances on to that there are some of them interested in agriculture, whether it is your farm or agriculture globally or at another level, being able to listen to what they're sharing. Nobody has all the answers, but listening to others. And eventually the time will come when we realize that, the day may come that we won't be at the helm of this farm. So when it's right, when you feel it's right to say, look, what would we like to do? And if you have a partner with you, a couple, start with your partner. If it's your brother or your relationship partner or your sister, whomever, if there are two people, two heads are always better than one. So how can we approach this subject of, someday something might happen to me and I won't be around any longer? What's the best?
Okay.
Sorry, Enda. Yeah.
And I might
suppose-
just ask you to put your headphones on. There's a little feedback on your sound, if you don't mind.
Okay, no problem.
Super. Thank you.
Is that applicable to both, Ruth?
No, yours is fine, Claire. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, hopefully that's better.
Yes.
Much better. Thank you.
We'll say, Claire, that sometimes we'll say it may be an uncle, it may be a nephew. Like every farm, we'll say, will be different throughout the country. And I suppose that's the important thing is as well to be aware of that as well. That there's no blueprint for this conversation. It's, we'll say, how it happens. But I suppose the really important thing is that it's done carefully and it's done with, I suppose, compassion, and that everybody within the family is acknowledged.
And absolutely. And I saw that when I was doing my Nuffield study in Australia. I saw succession facilitators facilitating these conversations. And I thought, holy moly, before that would happen in Ireland. But here we are. We've embraced that it's okay to talk about succession in our family. And each family and each farm is different. You'll have very viable, very good farms which need at least 2 generations or 2 labour units, and where they have an income for 2 generations, and there are families that are struggling way under the industrial wage, trying to keep a business going. So no two are the same, and no two are the same. So that's why it's complex in Ireland. We've no blueprint for everyone. But going back to what James said, is to write a will. At least you've that much done, ideally in consultation with your family. So at least have the will in place so that if, God forbid, if something happens prematurely and a succession process hasn't taken place, at least your wishes are heard and known, having given that some thought and some guidance. But it's not an easy topic if people have never spoken about what will happen, because the previous generation may never have addressed the topic openly.
Okay. And why do you think, Claire, now you look at you've handled many cases and you've years of experience. Why is it so hard for some farmers to start this conversation, in your opinion?
Probably a question for a psychologist now, Enda, but from my experience, a lot of it has to do with the history of how they got the farm themselves, or the conversations that were or were not held around it. They may have come home very young, not been given, the educational opportunities that other family members received, but things have moved on and we're willing and able to communicate more openly now, but it's still a very delicate topic for many, many families, a topic that we'll defer. So we'll talk about that later in the year, next year, after the next birthday. Deferring is something we're very good at on the succession topic. Quite often it's some emotional disturbance in a community or in a family will actually stir people on. Something has happened that has triggered the necessity for others to reflect and say, gee, because if that happened in our family, it would be a disaster. So quite often it's after a tragedy or an illness that people say, we actually have to do something in our own family. I haven't even a will made, they may say. Well, it's okay, can you start there? Start with your
Okay.
partner, if you have a partner, or if you don't, look at who's within the family or what are your options there. And I suppose farms are very valuable assets. The income doesn't always reflect the value of the asset. So that does create another level of conversation within the family, where there are
Okay.
others who are working off farm versus the person who wants to continue farming, knowing that the value of the farm is really only materialized if it's perhaps sold, unless it's one of the enterprises at the moment, which is, on a positive trajectory. But what goes up will come down. So this year being a very good year for some sectors, but other sectors haven't had such a good year. But
Yeah.
nothing remains constant in farming, except if you write your will, it's written in black and white. And a succession plan, if it's written and talked about, it's there. The family know what it is.
Okay, and it's, I suppose, look at the asset owner. It's up to the asset owner to overcome these emotional barriers. And when he does overcome them emotional barriers, how important is it now? You've mentioned about somebody, maybe a successor being identified. How important is it, we'll say, within these conversations to actually involve all the other members of the family who may be working away or may be in Australia or America or scattered around the world working? Is it important, in your opinion, to bring all the family together when you're having this conversation?
Well, we've taken the best practice model, and how that evolves is we ask the asset owner. So if somebody of 32 contacts us to say, look, I'll be 35 and I want to put a partnership in place, for example, and say, well, who owns the farm that you're talking about? My mother, my father. Right. So we'll start with the asset owners. So their needs, their future needs, what are their intentions? If there are other family members, they may say, well, we've educated all of them. We don't actually owe them anything. They're all doing okay. So we don't exclude anybody because they're still their children whom they love equally. So we start with the asset owners, their future needs, their income. What maybe they expect something from the farm that's unrealistic. Maybe they'd like to remain involved at some level. Will the family home where they're living, is that where they'd like to live indefinitely? There may be a discussion around it not being suitable for them later. So engaging initially with the asset owners, and then we say the next generation, we invite the parent or parents to please contact their adult children and let them know that they are considering a succession plan. So the following meetings with the adult children are generally done via Zoom. They could be anywhere in the world. So an hour on a Zoom call, letting them know that your parents are considering formulating a succession plan and perhaps transferring an asset to one of your siblings because they're at home actively engaged, or forming a partnership in collaboration with somebody else. And people generally are so relieved, say, oh, that's wonderful. They're finally doing what we've been asking them to do for years. Now we know the next time we go home that we won't be facing this conversation being deferred again. So it generally brings a huge relief to a family. Following that, we invite everybody to come together. Now, everybody being the parents, by and large, it is only those who really are interested and want to be involved in the farm going forward. Also at that meeting, it wouldn't be unusual to have the advisor, I'll be honest with you, and sometimes their accountant if it's a bigger enterprise. So the more successful meetings are when you have the advisor and you have the accountant. Sometimes we've actually had a tax planner as well as the accountant when it's, there may be a company involved and substantial assets. But to see the outcome of those meetings it's a privilege to be part of it, because you can see the business is going forward, the parents are looked after, their life's work is acknowledged, and other family members who may not be present at the meeting, but they will also be acknowledged in some way. And we always say to parents, if you've offloaded everything in your lifetime and you're still writing a will, and you wish to write a will because it's your privilege to write a will with whatever you still own, mention all of your children's names in that will. Though you may not be leaving them a lot in your will because they may have already received whatever it is you've gifted them, but mention all of their names. Don't leave any of them out at that stage, because it's the last time they're going to hear your voice, including them in your intentions and your wishes.
Yeah, and that's the importance of, we'll say, I suppose, acknowledging, we'll say, all the family members, and I suppose the importance of planning ahead and everything like that. Now, you mentioned there, we'll say, the role of the advisor, the role of the accountant, and even the we'll say the solicitor, and that it is very important, we'll say, and there's many types of transfers that can occur as well, Claire, I suppose. One can be by means of a will, maybe a lifetime transfer will occur, maybe a partnership will occur. So we'll say with all these different types of transfers that occur, advice from all the experts is so important. Would you agree with that, Claire?
And
Maybe-
each expert and professional has their own expertise.
Yeah.
And I've seen cases where the value of houses have appreciated substantially, and the young couple will build their fabulous home. But the value of the house versus the value of the farm. So if a conversation were held previous to that, they may have done things slightly differently. They may have transferred the farm before the house was built. So planning, doing that in consultation with your advisor. And a young person might say, sure, what is it to do with the advisor, the fact that I'm building a house? It does if there is a succession plan and part of a farm transfer to be embraced in that person's future. So planning from a tax point of view, from the farm transfer business point of view, the work relationships, all of that. There's no sudden surprises. Cases where somebody came home from abroad to discover mum and dad no longer own the farm nor the house. They've transferred everything. They've right of residency. I didn't know that they were actually doing it this year. While there may have been no objection, and it might have been the right thing and the most timely thing to do, but just not to have somebody excluded from that transition in a family farm, because it is the family. There are other members involved in that family, not just the person who's perhaps at home most able and most willing and most available to continue on the farm.
And I suppose that is a very important point to say there. When we're talking about planning ahead, this planning process could, we'll say, be 4, 5 years. Like, sometimes farmers will say, look at the short term gain. Maybe a successor, a son or daughter, maybe coming up on their 35th birthday, and they think, oh, to get the stamp duty relief, we'll have to transfer it now. But like when you're talking about a farm worth maybe 1 million, that stamp duty is pittance, we'll say, versus a bad decision. And would you have seen cases like that, Claire?
Absolutely. I've 6 months and I'll be 35 in 6 months' time, and we need to do something now. And I'm going, right, purely because it's a stamp duty deadline. What happened in the last 10 years from 25 to 35? What working relationship had they? How was the communication? So the clock is always ticking once we're born. So don't wait indefinitely, because time will catch all of us at some stage. So it's important that is noted, especially in late 20s, if you've had the opportunity to travel abroad, gain experience. If there's a plan in one person's mind, but it's not shared with others, we can't read what's in somebody else's mind. So
And that's the importance of sitting down, talking, because we'll say the potential successor whether him or her have plans and aspirations of their own. Like we'll say, this has to be considered as well in the modern day. Like we'll say most farmers are part-time farmers, they have an off-farm job, and whether they want to go and get education before they come home and take over the farm. All this is where that conversation is so important, Claire, isn't it?
Is, and you may find that a few of the family could say, well, we could all work off farm and work part-time at home. So if one isn't going full-time at home, there are different conversations in different families, and I have found where they said, well, sure, any of us could actually do what's going on at home, because it's 2 hours at night and 4 or 5 hours on Saturday and checking things on Sunday. So the need for a full-time labour unit, and where one can have a full-time income from that, and perhaps an income also, or some income for those who've handed over the asset. So it is changing from what was traditional. I'd say take the blinkers off and just look at other options, and look at who's in the family, nieces, nephews. Look at the bigger picture. It doesn't have to be just if none of your own, if you have children, if none of them really, if they may see it as a burden, and some do, look at the bigger picture while you can, because eventually time will run out. If it is your niece or nephew, and if you're the primary asset owner, it may be your spouse's niece or nephews. So it needs to be planned early, so the plan can actually be put in place with at least a 5-year lead into it. So time is critical here, Enda.
And there's so many different types of, I suppose, farm transfer that can take place. Whether, as you said there, sometimes a partnership could come about, we'll say, between two family members going forward. You could have a partnership situation, a share farming situation, collaborative farming. All these different types of scenarios are there and is possible. And I suppose just another point, and probably it's really important to emphasize. At the end of the day, the decision is with the asset holder. So the asset holder, it's very important that they are happy with the decision, and that their future is actually provided for as well. So would you comment on that, Claire? How can, we'll say, the asset holder, he has made a decision between, we'll say, whether it's a couple or whether it's a lady or a man on their own. How can they secure themselves going into the future? What should they be looking out for there?
Well, I've learned not to judge the book by the cover, in that when I meet with a lady or a couple and they're talking about the farm, and then they tell me, and the shares came in at 2.8 million. Now, if I were to look at the outside, you mightn't think they had much to put together. So dealing then with substantial wealth, which isn't actually a tangible asset in the form of land, that group of people are growing substantially in Ireland. So it does require planning at a different level, in that they have an incredible wealth, but yet the farm is what they see as the valuable asset. So planning for their future, and they say, well, we don't want to leave all that in case we went to a nursing home, it will all be gone. So they need to actually plan not only how to transfer the farm, but pay the tax, if that's what they are agreeable to doing, on those shares, and disposing of them while they're alive. I always say leave the minimum in the will if you can at all. So no two families are the same. No two cases are the same. And I'll pose a question for James, if it's slightly off, if I may. If a farm is transferred to a successor and they're living with their partner and they've 2 young children, and the successor, who is the owner of the farm, meets an untimely premature death, I'd ask James just to comment on it. If they're not married, because they've been living together and they have 2 young children. So James might come in on that one, because we would see a lot of young couples who are living together, but they're not married. So just touch on that one, James, if you don't mind, a little bit later. Sorry, Enda, but it's just an important one.
It is a very important one.
It's come up as well.
And we'll say definitely the emotional connection so is to the land and not to the Kerry shares.
Absolutely. That precious land is where
yeah.
the connection is. It is.
And that is so important, and it's so important to actually realize that look, this is one of the biggest decisions, if not the biggest decisions, that these people will be making in their lives, and to do it right and to respect it is just so important, and to give them the time and the space to be happy with their decision.
It is. And just listening, I suppose we listen. We're not advisors, so we listen. And with whether it's one or two people who are in communication with us, the solution is there for them. And sometimes all they really are doing is articulating it. And when they've said out loud, and we're not judging it, we're just paraphrasing it back. They said, it does make sense. We know what we should do. And we just wanted a sounding board, making sure that they're not depriving themselves of security going forward. They may have the state pension, they may not have the full state pension, it might be means tested pension. So check out that you can get the full state pension if you're in that pre-pension age, that you will qualify for the full state pension. And there are ways to ensure that that is possible for most people, especially if they've had children in the past. So just plan, but it does take time to plan. It does take time. And while you have time, but eventually we will run out of time. Not leaving things in a mess. And that's our choice. It's our choice to give it time to plan out what are my options here.
And it's so important, I suppose, us as advisors will say, for my own personal opinion, if an agricultural advisor is involved in a case, usually we're there to fix a problem. But in this case, what we have to do is just step back, because the solution of the problem, if there is a problem, is with the asset owners, and it's not with us. And when I just bring up that situation of a problem, Claire, that's where we'll say your mediation skills would come in. If a case does go, we'll say, astray and maybe a bit offline.
And I appreciate mediation for many people is seen as where you would go if there was conflict, but we use the mediation skills to listen and paraphrase back. And it's confidential, we're not judging. So, and with our agricultural qualifications, we'd understand the land and the farming situation. So it's listening with respect. And, somebody might say, sure, look, all we have is 20 or 40 acres and a handful of cattle and a handful of sheep, and none of them want it. But hold on a while. They may not farm it the way you're farming it, but there are other opportunities. They might like to do something slightly different. It's a fabulous holding for a niche sector to do something different. So it might be done differently in the future, but don't dismiss the opportunity that it can present for other members of the family. We've had some beautiful success stories of people who've done things differently to the previous generation, and really has brought great life to an area that was in decline.
Excellent. And I suppose just Ruth, if we thanks for that, Claire. And I suppose we'll just recap on a few of the main points and sort of the take home points. Ruth, if you want to share the slide there. I suppose at the center of it all, the most important thing to remember is that the asset holder is the person, we'll say couple, with the power to make these decisions. So it's up to them, we'll say, to plan ahead in conjunction with the family and to start a conversation. Listen to all the family, to acknowledge all family members, to listen to all their hopes and expectations. And what these hopes and expectations are, we'll say, attainable or in reality, whether they can be achieved. The outside people that is, will say, essential to any, will say, decision, to get the legal advice, to get the financial advice from the accountants, involved agricultural consultant or the agricultural advisor in the case as well, most definitely. And then in your role there, Claire, you'd be facilitating, we'll say, this whole conversation. And I suppose when we're talking about the owners or the asset holders, there is a necessity there for them to overcome that emotional barrier. They have to get this conversation started. They have to, we'll say, put a plan in place. And it's the asset owner, with respect, that has to make this decision. So the other parties in it, whether they're sons, daughters, nephews, nieces, they don't have the power to make the decision. The decision lies with the asset holder, and they should be respected and given time and space to make that decision. Whether it's a gradual farm transfer through a partnership, through lease agreement, through collaborative farming, or whether it's an initial, we'll say, signing over a part of the farm. Every situation is going to be different, and every farm is going to be different. And we'll say the potential successor, make sure that their future is needs is met and achieved and acknowledged, that whether they're working off farm, whether they require education, that their needs are acknowledged. And then after that, then the asset holders role post the farm transfer, and actually we'll say their financial well-being post the transfer as well. And then finally, Claire, then I suppose the next slide on, then Ruth, if you just move on, the next slide is, I suppose, this is where we'll say that the likes of the mediation or facilitation, as you say, what we're doing is we're using our mediation skills to facilitate a conversation more than mediation, because we're sitting back, we're listening to the problem. The solution to the problem is there in the middle of that, we'll say, gap between the problem and the solution. And all we're doing as facilitators is closing that gap between the problem and the solution. And we're using our mediation skills to do that. And I suppose that's where we have to sit back, listen to the conversation with respect, and give them the room to do it. So look at Claire, thanks very much. We could sit here and talk all night, Claire, because you have a vast array of experience and knowledge. But thank you very much for sharing with us tonight. And we'll pass back to Ruth and you for questions and that.
Thanks very much, Enda and Claire. I think you've gone through an awful lot there, and hopefully a few tips and skills that some of our audience will be able to use at home when they navigate through this process. I mentioned to you earlier that we were going to run a poll, so just to give you the results of that. So to be fair, you're well ahead of the national targets. So out of the participation, people that are participating on the call here, 81% of you responded to our question. And out of those that responded, 62% of you currently have a will in place, which is great, given that the national average is currently only around 30%. So you're twice what the national average is. So well done to those of you that have that in place. And to the remaining 38% of you, when we finish this call, that's your next job to put on your to-do list, is to put a will in place. Okay, so look, I'd like to thank both James, Enda and Claire for all the information that they've shared with us. I'm going to now ask Hugh McEnany, our financial specialist in the farm management unit, to join us, and Hugh is going to respond to or direct some of the questions that have come through. So just to remind you, all of the questions that come through are completely anonymous. Nobody is going to see what you've asked or see a name or anything associated with it. Please feel free to use that on your drop down box there. So there's a section for you to be able to put in questions to the audience, and please feel free to use that, and we will direct them to the relevant speaker on our panel. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Ruth. Really, the questions are kind of varied, so I maybe start with the easy one with James, I suppose, is like, how much does a will cost, James? Or like we'll say almost 40% of the people on the call here don't know, so they don't have a will. So where would they start, or what's their first protocol
I
when they
suppose,
need to
yeah.
draw up a will?
Well, the first thing is to decide what they want to do. But when they have decided what they want in their will, they need to go to a solicitor. And I suppose the Law Society rules, that if you ask a solicitor to do a job, they have to quote you for it. So they'll give you a price. But it could be anything from, you walk into a solicitor's office, I want you to give me a piece of paper with my will on it, and you walk out the door. It could be as little as €100. But in lots of cases, it might be zero, but the estate is charged when you pass on. So you don't have to worry about the cost. It's the executor who is administering the estate has to worry about it at the other side. So it depends from practice to practice. So the best thing to do is go and talk to your solicitor, and they'll give you a guideline price.
Thanks very much, James. There was a question there, Claire, you mentioned it in your talk about the right of residence, and one of the guests tonight is wondering, what is a right of residence? There, Claire.
And unmute. Thank you. Now, it is where assets have been transferred, but the person who transferred the assets, they have retained a right of residence, so they continue living legally as they would have in that home or that house or the property after transferring the asset. There's a right of residence, and this is a legal term, so I'll give you, to the best of my knowledge, there's a right of residence and there's also exclusive right of residence. So right of residence being you can live on, exclusive means you're the only person who can live on there, and nobody else may have to use that shared space, but you may like to have other family members coming, but whereby you would also have whatever was traditionally your normal right of residence in that property, and you would have it as long as you live.
And Claire, this is generally exclusively to the dwelling house. Am I right?
Yes, unless one had an additional property and you stipulated that you also wanted right of residence. But dividing two rights of residence is really, which is home. You can really have only one primary residence. So people might say, oh, I want to have the holiday home as well. So that's then which is your right of residence? Where is your primary residence? So if there's a second property, that's another conversation, and that's where you'd seek legal advice, because some people would like to have access to the holiday home as well as they traditionally had, perhaps, in transferring that, but it's not their primary residence.
If I could come in there as well, Hugh, I suppose if somebody is deciding to pass the family home over to a child and retain right of residence, they need to, I suppose, think about, the future. Let's say all the bedrooms are upstairs, and maybe if they needed a downstairs bedroom or a bathroom needed to be changed around or built downstairs, does the right of residence allow them to make changes to the property? Could other family members arrive in and live on top of them, and how do they feel about that? And so before, like, we talk about the asset owners, we're not saying that you give the assets over, because government policy is that we pass on the farm while people are alive. You make the decision that's right for you, because once you give it, you can't take it back. So when you're given over the house or the family home and you retain right of residence, you need to be sure, that whatever decision you make, that you can live with the consequences. And, you may want to make amendments to the structure of the house downstairs bathroom, downstairs bedroom, or wider doorways or whatever. So you need to take account of those things before you, and as part of the conversation, before you pass over the asset, because if you don't, you could end up in a sticky situation down the road.
So, James, the kind of message here is once it's gone, it's gone. So make sure you have, informed decisions made of your position and the position that you have going forward.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's about the communication at Enda and Claire we're talking about, that all the communication is clear and everybody knows what the position is, and if you get good advice, what are the risks if you make those decisions.
And if
And
I
you-
may say there, Hugh, it's easier to negotiate that while you're in the position of owning the asset. So it's part of the negotiation prior to the transfer. There's a greater willingness to agree when you are holding the bone versus when you were transferred.
Yeah,
Thank you, Claire.
Hugh,
Thank you, Claire.
if I just could come in, sometimes
No problem.
we remember we were talking about transferring the asset, but we forget about when the asset is transferred, what that life will look like. So that's very, very important that the asset holder will say addresses post transfer and puts a plan in place there, and that's so, so important to avoid them situations.
Thank you, Enda. Ruth, being chair lady tonight, you're not getting off the hook because I have a question and it's very much directed at you. Does the registered farm partnership rules will overrule a will in the event of the will not being updated?
We would have covered last night. So in a standard registered farm partnership, there's no requirement to transfer the assets at all. So if the partnership in itself had maybe increased the stock numbers, then the additional capital that is built up in those stock would be divided within the partners based on their profit sharing ratio. But other than that, the assets that each individual brings to the partnership, they retain ownership of those. So if the partnership was dissolved and maybe it was a parent that passed, his assets would follow the line of what he specified or she specified in the will. Now, the difference would lie if we had a succession farm partnership. So on the succession partnership, we make a commitment that we're going to transfer 80% of the assets within a 10-year period of the partnership, the succession partnership agreement. And it's very important in those cases then that the will is updated to reflect what is in the succession partnership. But it doesn't overrule it. It's very important that the will and the succession plan match each other when they're actually completed.
And of course, Ruth, if there's anything extra that's not mentioned in the will, that comes back from the partnership, it ends up in the residue of the will, so it'll still get distributed as per the wishes of the deceased.
Yeah.
Enda, since I have you, I may as well ask you, who starts the conversation around succession? Who instigates it? Like Claire mentioned, it's great to have the conversation, but sometimes we come across that who makes the first move? It's like a game of chess. Who makes the first move on the board?
And that's what it's like, Hugh, is sometimes it is like a game of chess, and we'll say a game of chess, there's no two games of chess the same, and there's no two farm transfers the same. So who initiates the conversation? It could be, we'll say, a family member sitting around the family table, maybe working at home on the farm and saying to his or her parents, what's the story, what's the plans going forward. It could be the parents gathering around their kids around the table saying, well, what's the plan here? Who's interested in it? So every conversation it can be initiated by so many different people. It can be initiated also by a solicitor, by an accountant, by the advisor, just even asking the family members or asking the asset owner, have their plan put in place. So there's no real, we'll say, fixed or fast rules there about who can initiate or who can start the conversation. But it's how it's steered and handled then after that. But the power is with the asset owner when the decisions are made, and that's where the important one is. But it is like a game of chess, Hugh, and there's no two games of chess the same. But that's it. Anyone can initiate the conversation. Yeah.
Thank you, Enda. Thank you. James, I might revert to you on this one is where can you check if you qualify for full state pension? Where can you check?
You could do that, I suppose, relatively quickly online so most people tonight are online, so they're used to work on the computer. You could go on to mywelfare.ie and put in your MyGov code, and you can ask for your PRSI history, and you can more or less print it off straight away. So that's one way. Another way is to make a phone call to the Department of Social Welfare, and you can figure it out from there. They'll help you out on the phone. But the fastest way is by computer. Log
Thanks,
on to
James.
mywelfare.ie.
Revenue.ie.
Could I come in there, Hugh? And
Yes, Claire.
once you have it printed out, it may not be possible to interpretate it. So make an appointment with your local social welfare manager and ask them, could they please read this? Have I enough contributions of the right class paid in when I reach the age of 66? Because if you're under 66, there may be time to make some amendments, especially if you had children and stayed at home looking after children or looked after somebody, parent need. So you may be able to bridge it to bring it up to having the 40 years contributed by the time you reach 66, if you have time now to take action. But it's your responsibility to print it off and bring it to the social welfare office.
And citizens information also can be very helpful to help people with that, and both log on, print it off for you, and interpret what comes out the other side.
James, while I have you on the wills, is a lifetime will a preference?
I suppose really they're new. They've only really appeared in the last number of years, and most of them are around medical care. So if you're unable to make the decision for yourself as to your care, so they're quite new, and I suppose it's something that if you're thinking about, that you need to have a discussion with your own solicitor, as to what your wishes might be. Should you think that you're heading down a road where you can't make decisions for yourself as to who will make them for you, and it's probably better to do it that way than, sometimes I have family members contact me, and there's somebody in a nursing home with dementia, and to make decisions around leasing land or entitlements and who signs the forms, and you have to have full power of attorney, and that can take a bit of time and can be costly to do. So, if there's a history of dementia in your family, or some of those kind of diseases, and we never know what kind of care we need. So if you have assets, a living will is one way to allow somebody to make full decisions in relation to the business on your behalf. But it's a new area, so there's not a huge amount of examples, and I suppose in Teagasc we don't have a huge knowledge of it. But yes, it is something worth considering and finding out for your own situation.
Thanks, James. I'll just throw it out there if anyone wants to grab hold of this. How do you safeguard your farm against the Fair Deal scheme, but still ensure your needs are met if you need to be cared for? Now, that's one of the honest questions.
Yeah, so I suppose if I have a go at that question, Hugh, well, you're talking about transferring the assets, so there's a 5-year look back rule. So you don't know when you need care, so you need to transfer those assets in good time. So now they're put beyond the reach of the HSE for the nursing home support scheme. And then it's what provision do you put in for your care? So it might be part of the conversation, that, John, you're getting the farm, so you have to look after me. Or there's some provision put in place as part of the transfer. So that all needs to be part of the conversation. So Enda and Claire, you might comment on how that conversation might go, and maybe Claire, you've seen cases like that you might be able to comment on.
And sometimes people may have the farm transferred and they're going into a nursing home on year 3. So the family may decide, and quite often it's the person who has received the farm doesn't want to have the farm implicated by perhaps the parent who have already gone into the nursing home. So they may take out a loan to bridge it to get to 5 years. So they can actually pay on a weekly, monthly basis to get to the 5-year, so that when there is a 5-year look back, the assets will have been transferred. But it does mean it has to be paid for ongoing. If there is substantial dry cash somewhere, that can be used, but other family members may say, well, that was to come to us. Why should we lose what we were to gain? Because the charge, you're trying to protect the farm, and it's not all about the farm. So you will have those. We've been involved in some cases like that where families were not in agreement as to how the nursing home was to be paid when there was a farm involved and dry cash. So again, here the onus is on the individual who owns the assets, if they can at all, to plan not to hold on to the assets indefinitely. Because we know the implications of the fair deal. We have that information, but it's what the individual does knowing that information. And that's different for every family.
And it comes back to the importance again there, James, of having a plan written down for the asset owner post transfer. So that's clearly written down. We'll say what happens in the case if nursing home is required, that is looked at and it's written down and everybody knows where they stand, because that's when we'll say family fallouts can occur. We'll say if, as you say, Claire, dry cash is used from the asset owner themselves to protect the farm, but then the other siblings who are expecting that money aren't getting that money now for the protection of the farm that another family member is getting. So you can see where that situation is going. A plan written down for the asset owner post transfer is so important.
Are there any exemptions available to stamp duty on farm transfer that can be availed of if you're over 35?
Consanguinity relief, you would say.
Yeah, it's consanguinity
you'll
relief,
probably
James,
cover that Thursday night.
Yeah. So I suppose if it is to be answered, I'll have a crack at myself. If it's within the same family, a blood relation, you can avail of consanguinity relief, which reduces the stamp duty relief from the normal 7.5% to 1%. If the person is a family member and over 35, is the quick answer to it. There'll be more detail on that on my talk on Thursday night.
And now is a great time, if I may say. We know the figures. No stamp duty up to 35, consanguinity relief. We don't know what it will be like in 5 years' time. So, it might be a really good time to look at transferring, knowing where the thresholds are currently, and they're favourable currently, if it's appropriate to do so.
Thank you. Root again, they just kind of maybe carried over a few from last night, is what happens if the farm partnership where a partner dies, who is the asset owner of the farm, and he has no will and he leaves 2 partners behind?
So, as I mentioned before, with the registered farm partnership, it's listed in the capital accounts, which each individual brings into that partnership. So when a partner dies, officially then the partnership is dissolved. So everything that each individual bought into that partnership, they're entitled to take back out again. And for the deceased person, what comes out of that partnership would then form part of his estate. And that would run through the procedure as to what James went through earlier, depending on who's surviving within the family unit as to the breakdown as to how that would be distributed. So In a standard registered farm partnership, there is no transfer of assets. But if the partnership has invested within the farm, then the value of that would be divided based on their profit sharing ratio or what was agreed within the partnership agreement at the time that was done.
Thank you, Ruth. James, another bit of a taxation question that will probably be covered on Thursday night anyway. For an uncle transferring to a nephew, the farm transfer retirement relief threshold for a CGT is capital gains tax is currently 750,000 up to the age of 70. Do we see any risk in the budget that this will change this limit or alter how it applies? And if a binding contract is signed before the budget, but the land registry isn't completed till afterwards, would this relief still apply?
I would think that once whatever is there, the date of signing is what is.
It's what's implemented.
Yeah. But I suppose we don't know what's going to happen in the budget, but what the Department of Agriculture wants is, and the government want, is consistency, you know. So we have relatively stable tax rules. There's slight tweaks to them, to the capital tax rules, and like we're looking at young trained farmer relief for a long period of time now, and consanguinity relief is around a long time as well. We had a major taxes review of the agricultural taxes in 2014, and they haven't changed much since. So it's about consistency, because if we don't have consistency, then you're putting, you're being a bit like Donald Trump, you're stirring the market a bit, and it might upset decisions being made at farm family level, and we don't want that. So I would be very surprised if, you know, major upheaval is created in the budget. It's about keeping things consistent so that families can make decisions, you know, through normal, you know, ongoing. I suppose it's just to be, you want clarity, I suppose, is what you want in law and over time. You know, so that you don't have sudden shocks to the system, because then a shock could end up that people don't make the decision. So then the age of profile of farmers gets older. So it's around incentives and continuing those incentives. So generation renewal is important in the next round of CAP, and all of the reliefs that we have allow people to bring forward the date of transfer, which is good for agriculture, because the younger farmers tend to be better educated, so we can reach our water quality rules, and, you know, younger farmers tend to be less risky to, you know, farm safety accidents and things like that. So, you know, government policy is about early transfer, so I can't see that changing in any budget.
Thanks,
I'm
James.
just conscious of the time. We might just take maybe just one or two more questions, and we might.
Okay, while we've clear here that some of these questions can lap over onto Thursday night, so and we don't answer, we'll be able to answer back online anyway. Claire, how do we deal with stubborn parents who refuse to let go?
If in any way that they'd be willing to connect, just to say hello. If they might come to the clinics, which are coming up later in October, if in any way we'll find a way to, if in any way we can connect with them, we'll figure out what's their need in holding on to it, what's it giving them to hold on to it, what's the fear around letting go. So there's a reason why they're holding on. So if we can get behind the story to the feeling, we'd make progress in some shape there, if we could engage in some way with them. So there is a reason why people hold on, generally out of fear. So, and it could be a fear from a previous generation that historically they saw somebody deprived or fell on hard times. So that fear is still very real. It might be a fear of a previous generation. So, but if we can get them to reach out, whomever it is with, whether it's their advisor or through a discussion group or whatever way we can reach to the parents, we'd sit with them, and one-to-one, we'd soften that ice.
Thank you, Claire. Just a comment from one of the participants is Just a note on the living will can also be referred to as the healthcare directive, and this should be registered with the decision support service so that your decisions are noted in what you wish if you become incapacitated down the line. Ruth, there is one or two more questions there, but
Look,
we have
I
time
think
for one or two.
we've gone a good bit over time. What we will do is any questions that we maybe haven't got around to, we have the names of the individuals that have been able to ask those questions, and we can respond to them individually if we don't cover them on Thursday's webinar. So, look, I just on behalf of the team, I'd like to very much thank all our panelists this evening for coming to speak with us. I think you've given everybody a huge amount of information that they will be able to use going forward. And we would hope in a lot of cases that will make the transition that good bit easier going forward. I hope that you found it useful and informative. This is the second webinar as part of our Generation Renewal Week. Tomorrow night we'll be up in Roscommon at a beef farm walk on the farm of Jared and Shane O'Connor. And we're going to discuss, they'll be discussing all of the performance on the farm, but in addition to that, I'll be just covering then their succession plan and how they're navigating their way through the process of transferring the farm currently from Jared to Shane. On Thursday night then, Hugh originally mentioned it as well too, we have our final webinar, a part of the series, where he will go through the taxes and the reliefs that are associated with farm transfers. And then on Friday, we have our final event of the week, which is a dairy farm walk in Westmeath. That's on the farm of Tony McCormick and Chris Cahill. These are two individuals that are unrelated, currently operating in a registered farm partnership, milking 240 cows. And for anyone that's not in a position to travel to the walks, the details on those farms and the topics that we will be covering are available for you to read up in the booklet that we have produced as part of Generation Renewal Week. So you'll see Q put up a link for you there earlier in the chat box. So if you look at the chat box there's a link that will bring you directly to the Teagasc website for Generation Renewal section. The booklet that we've mentioned that's now being published as part of that. The booklet here, they'll be able to download that and to read about those two case studies on the farm and some other ones that are operating under a share farm arrangement as well too. So look at this, the meeting this evening has been recorded. If you want to have a review and look back at that, please feel free to do that. That will go up on the Generation Renewal section on the Teagasc website within the next day or two. All the webinars are being recorded, so they'll be available to view. So that's the events that are running for the next of the week. And just to give it a mention there, I know Claire, you mentioned it, the transferring the family farm clinics, and I know Claire, you'll be involved with all of those with us throughout the tour as we're doing. So they're starting on Tuesday the 30th of September. We're starting up in Gort and Galway. We're then heading to Roscommon on the 1st of October. We're going to Cahir on the 7th of October. We're in SETU in Waterford on the 8th of October. We then head to Dunmanway in West Cork on the 9th. And on the 14th of October, we're down in Monaghan. So you'll see a QR code on the screen there. In addition to that, you'll be able to get details on that on our Generation Renewal section up on the Teagasc website. So look, I'd like to thank the audience all for joining us this evening, and a huge thank you to our panelists for sharing their wisdom and knowledge with us. And I wish you all every success in your navigating your succession and inheritance journey. Thank you.